sense. Duh! That's where they've been living for 100 years. So no wonder Moses was a little upset and dropped the 15 commandments and there were only 10. Mel Brooks, I'm sorry. So when Moses came down the mountain, he encountered the Israelites worshiping this image of a God that was from their past. But it was all they knew, because they had no notion of God. They had no image of God. They had nothing to work with. They had no commandments, no laws by which to live. Change for them was to start all over again from scratch. And Moses gave them the 10 Commandments with which to begin that process. So when Jesus Christ came along, everybody had been living for 1,000 years with the commandments. Everybody knew the commandments. They knew what you had to do to stay right with God. You had to follow these food rules. You had to make sure you were circumcised if you were going to be an Israelite God worshiper. And you had to follow the 10 Commandments. And Paul says, that was then. This is now. He's not negating the commandments. What he is saying is, doing this fancy dance of trying to follow the food regulations or trying to do the marks that make you right with God isn't what it's about. It's how you behave. It's how you are in the world. Be a slave to righteousness, not a slave to sin. Now, sin is a very tough word for most of us to deal with. We hate that word because most of us haven't got any idea really what it means. And we all think, well, I'm not a sinner. I'm not a mean, awful person. I'm not rotten. I don't think perversely. I don't do rotten, horrible things to people. But I have done in my life things that disconnect me. That disconnect me in my relationship with God. There are things that I have done in my life that make me feel to the core of my being ashamed of who I am. Paul is saying, when we are disconnected in our relationship with God, we have become a slave to everything that was before. We have become a slave to that which disconnects us from God. We have become a slave to sin. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't folks who just want to go down the toilet and just say the heck with all of it, as opposed to the other one. The heck with all of it, and just go the way of the flesh. Paul isn't just talking about the way of the flesh. Paul is talking about how we think about one another, how we behave toward one another, how we treat one another. When we are slaves to God, and I know you hate that word. I'm not a slave to anybody. I'm independent. My country fought, and I'm independent, and I'm free. I'm not a slave to anybody. The truth is, we're human creatures. We are not gods. We didn't create the cosmos. We didn't create the planet. We are going to be serving someone or something in this life. Better, says Paul, to serve God. You were baptized into Christ. Now, I know a lot of you are saying, oh, this is basic stuff. It isn't basic off. No matter what, no matter how rotten you think you are, no matter how rotten you think you behave, no matter how many times you think you've made a mistake, God will not write you up. However, God is trying to train you for the present always. God is trying to train you for the world as it is today. And there are expectations about how we need to grow and how we need to respond to the needs of the world today. If we are Christians, there are some training doors that we need to go through. Let me tell you, God is always there to teach us how to get through the God door. Like dog door, only how to get through the God door. Sorry, I missed that. It was really good. God, we are slaves to God. And don't think of that word as a bad word. We are bound to God in a way that God will never, ever let go of us. But God keeps us in training every moment of our lives. And when we are confronted by needs in our society, needs in our church, needs for perhaps a change in our thinking, here is a place where you can learn. Here is a place where we can get together and we can learn about new directions that we may need to take. God has us in training every day of our lives. We are not perfected people until we're dead. So just be glad that you're on Jesus' list, that you're on God's list, that you are in Jesus Christ. And God is training you to get through that door and will never write you off.